before I start, could I just get a show of hands for how many people bike in Burlington currently? All right, awesome. So I'm going to throw out a couple of questions throughout so it helps the people know the roads a little bit, have some opinions. So this is work going on about a year. I started last spring. I was in Copenhagen studying abroad, and I applied for a research grant at the Transportation Research Center here on campus. I was awarded the grant. I was able to spend last summer distributing the survey you see in front of you downtown in person at a few locations. Got about 119 responses. Got that data, made some results, and present to you here now. So before I go, I just want to give a huge thanks to the Transportation Research Center. They're an organization on campus that they're primarily dealing with graduate students and research on transportation, but they're one of the premier locations in Vermont. And they've been a lot of help to me personally, and I know Ben as well, and other undergraduate students who are interested in this stuff, and they've made resources available, taking classes there and got this grant. So a big thanks to them. So the goal of this research, I set out to do something that required a little bit more like engineering skill and technological ability than I have, but it morphed into something that I was able to do, and that's something I'm really proud of. So I wanted to look at where people in Burlington are biking, why they choose to bike there, not other places, what they like about the routes they're using, and why they choose those routes. This work definitely did not start in a vacuum. I looked primarily at stuff the city of Burlington has done with the Burlington North-South Bicycle route study, which was done in 2002. There they tried to assess which routes going from the south of the city, coming to the north, were essential for bicyclists and pedestrians, and how we can make steps forward to make those routes better for those people. Also, Chittenden County Regional Planning Commission has a lot of data, such as Ben uses, and they're doing projects here and there that are really helpful, as well as Burlington Public Works and Local Motion, which is a local advocacy group. So I'm going to break this presentation into 4 categories. What respondents said their favorite places were to bike, what infrastructure they like, what infrastructure they don't like, how safe people feel. Stephanie said that she doesn't bike because she doesn't feel safe. So what are those features that make people feel endangered? As well as how does the weather and seasons impact people in Burlington? Because I hear a lot of people say, I can't bike because it snows like 60% of the year, how can I bike? So I want to look into that as well. So as I said, I got 119 responses. To do this, I worked primarily at the farmer's market. That's where I got the most people to fill this out, but also employees at Ski Rack and Outdoor Beer Exchange. Somerville was another location where I set up a table and distributed the survey. It took about 20 minutes, so it was pretty qualitative, and I think the reason that I only got 119 is because a lot of people would begin taking the survey and then abandon it halfway through because it was really substantial. So got a lot of data, and these places were especially helpful at getting it out. Bikercycle Vermont is somewhere that I'll talk about a little bit later. I tried to do distribution there, but failed for reasons that I'll explain, and that are pretty important to me. So here's some demographics of the respondents. Gender ties pretty closely with the national average of bicyclists. It's about 1/3 female to 2/3 male. Age here is pretty much right on as well. Education, it's more educated, also using that kind of as an indicator of income. As well as on the lower right, I did a classification. So I asked people to tell me how they feel they are as bicyclists, something that's been done in places. Probably the most famous example of this is in Portland, Oregon, where they have a really in-depth system of self-classification that I didn't use, but modeled it, having them tell me what kind of biker they are instead of trying to do that determination myself. And as you'll see, a lot of people think they're experts at bicyclists. But that's pretty telling because the people I ask may not be the people who are wary of it. So keep that in mind as we go through the results, because a lot of these people think that they're master bicyclists. So, people in the room, could I get 2 people to tell me where their favorite place to bike in Burlington is? Okay, any hands? Ben?
I love going down Pearl Street.
Pearl Street, someone else?
Spear Street.
Spear Street. Okay. So overall, everyone loves the recreational paths, which isn't surprising. That's where you go when you want to enjoy yourself. 54% of respondents. This was an open-end. This was actually a list. No. This was open-ended, so people could say anything they wanted. I didn't feed this to them, and without inciting any answers, over 54% said they love the waterfront bike path. The city's investing a lot of money in this. They know that people love it. And it's interesting to think about, this could be a gateway for a lot of bicyclists. Are these recreational paths that people love? Spear Street is a common recreational spot in South Burlington, but a lot of people ride it here. 127, Intervale, and Riverside and the Old North End are the 2 kind of outliers. Old North End, a lot of people said they love being in the neighborhoods, like people watching down there, not a lot of car traffic. So that's an interesting thing to feed off of, as well as Riverside Ave, where there's that shared path for both pedestrians and bicyclists. So that's a piece of infrastructure that people are obviously liking a lot. 6% said a route they use for utility, which, because at Outdoor Gear Exchange and Ski Rack, a lot of the people responding were riding to work every day. It's kind of disheartening that no one really liked the route they're taking, obviously. You know, people like the stuff they're doing on the weekend, but riding to work in the morning is not enjoyable, it's not their favorite. 10% said I like this because of certain infrastructure, and 100% chose a route. If they mentioned a road, that road had a bike lane. At least a bike lane, or Riverside, which has the separate path. So respondents were asked, I gave them this list, and for each one I said 1 to 5, how much do you like this? 1 being the least, 5 being the most. Or how much do you think it would increase, make bicycling in Burlington better? People thought that both one-way and two-way protected bike lanes would be really awesome. That's what they want the most, by far. Two-way is something really interesting. I worked a lot with the city of Burlington on this, with Nicole Loesch at the DPW, and they are really looking at two-way bike lanes, which would be, instead of having one lane going with car traffic, you'd have one single lane both going directly against each other, which sounds a little crazy to me, but with an explanation of what those are, a little graphic on the survey, people still chose that as that's what they'd like. And you can see, even though we've heard some criticisms of on-road bike lanes, people still chose it 39% of the time as the most important feature. So could I get a couple of people to say, when you're riding on the road, what do you avoid the most? What are you most fearful of? What don't you want to deal with?
Having to turn left.
Okay.
Trucks.
Trucks?
Yeah.
Okay. And yeah, Ben?
Texting drivers.
What was that?
Texting drivers.
Oh, yeah. Car doors opening.
Yeah.
Getting
Yeah.
bored, yeah.
Park, yeah,
Yeah.
park cars
And weird stuff happening on the edge, so you can't.
Oh, when there's like gravel or
Yeah,
when there's a
just,
pothole,
yeah.
yeah. So, given these options, this is what people chose as the feature that they'd avoid the most. People are most afraid of cars when they're moving fast. And they're also afraid of, a separate category for dense traffic. So even if it's non-area notorious for fast cars, just if there's a lot of cars going by you, or maybe even a few lanes could be dense, then people want to avoid that as well. Steep hills is something in Burlington that I think a lot of people decide whether or not they're going to ride their bike because of the hills, but I thought that 17% was actually fairly low. I thought that a lot of people would say, when I get on my bike, first thing I avoid is going up Main Street. But this could also have to do with the expert level that I talked about earlier. A lot of these people bike a lot, so I know myself, moderate, maybe expert. I don't think about where I'm going anymore because I know not to go on the hill. So if I was answering this question, I probably wouldn't even think of the hill because it's so off my radar. So that's saying, but cars you can avoid. So I'm saying keep in mind. So here I asked respondents, open-ended question, what makes you feel unsafe? So unlike the other one, which was out of these things, what would you avoid the most? This is kind of the question I asked you about what makes you feel endangered. And people said, for the most part, open-ended question, and I took all the responses and coded it and then put it into different categories. People who specified motorists the most, so not necessarily even cars, but people in their cars. They said drivers, not cars, which is really interesting. Broke that down into aggressive people and inattentive. So texting would go into inattentive, and those damn drivers would go into aggressive, stuff like that. Car traffic coming in close second, and then road conditions, as you mentioned, about maybe gravel because we a lot of times designate the gutter essentially to the bike lane, and so people really feel that, and they're wary of having to swerve out of the lane into traffic.
I think other cyclists is
A lot of people talk about seeing other cyclists disobeying laws and feeling fearful that will have negative impacts on how drivers deal with them, because they see people running lights and they think, oh, those people are getting it bad, then drivers won't respect us as much, so they said other cyclists. And this is an overall gauge of how safe you feel, and the people that I surveyed felt fairly safe, for being that they agree that they feel safe in Burlington, which I was somewhat surprised by. So this was weather. What situation do you feel comfortable biking in? People don't want snow and ice, not too surprising, and that's indicative of people not biking in the winter time. A pretty large shift down from 48% saying that they bike a few every day in the summer, down to only 10% saying they bike every day in the winter. Open-ended question, what would you like to see? What improvements would you like to see? Without me presenting any options, many people said bike lanes, about half, pavement improvement, which could be filling potholes, stuff such as that, connectivity in third, and protected bike lanes I put separately, but I think a lot of people doing bike lanes might have been meaning that, but didn't specify. Then here's where, in the middle, if you take the survey and open it up, I had respondents draw in using a pen which routes they take, using arrows to indicate direction, and boxes as origins. And this was the route that they may take most frequently. So for many of them, it was a commute. And I think what's interesting is that this is not much different than a route you take in a car, I think. You don't have many options in Burlington, so you see that Main Street was really popular. I didn't specify here the directionality, but a lot of people come down Main Street and aren't wary of it. As well as taking Pine Street, North Ave, and Riverside. So these are all the main entryways into the city, and so people don't really have a choice, so I don't know how much this shows. But especially downtown, South Winooski was the route with the most people on it.
Which is a terrible route to ride a bike on.
Yeah, but it's also the most convenient, I think.
And is the line on the left the bike path?
Yeah, so that little squiggle is the bike path. So there were a fair amount of people who commuted from the north or the south and could use the bike path. But as you see Pine Street, I think nearly everyone was choosing that instead. Pine Street's another road there's a bike lane now, but very little infrastructure and pretty high traffic speeds.
And there's sidewalks on Front City?
Yeah, there are sidewalks, but not all the way.
The only way to do it,
But there's square chunk sidewalks too,
Yeah.
meaning it's unpleasant to ride a bike.
Yeah.
And I also had people indicate for this route they used most often what was their purpose. A lot of people chose a mix of things. They were commuting. Most people were commuting on this route, but the second most was 20% of people who were doing this for recreation. So here I just broke it down to street segments. So the most common route, as you can see down here, these are the ones that that were used over 26 times or more. People could say they're going to and from, and they'd both be counted. But here you have the segment of South Winooski, a little bit of Pine Street and Riverside as the highest use. So with this data, I broke it into two categories: stated preferences and revealed preferences. And this is just a summary of what I've gone over. Favorite places, waterfront bike path, and other off-road paths. I won't go through this for the sake of time, but if you want to take a second look over it. And for revealed preferences, this is again where more engineering or technical ability would come in. Work's been done to compare shortest possible routes to the routes that people actually take. Bicyclists are incredibly accurate at choosing the shortest route whenever possible, so it's a good method to look at a route that someone takes from A to B, using figuring out what the shortest possible one is and comparing where they deviate from that, and that can be really indicative of what people don't like, because they don't take the shortest path here. That's because they really don't like what's there. So I attempted to do that just by looking at individual things, but you can do it in GIS and be really effective. So some of my recommendations would be definitely South Winooski Avenue, the most ridden place without any bike infrastructure. It's the core of the city, so having bike infrastructure there would both be helpful to the most bicyclists, but also show that the city actually cares about these things. A lot of the bike lanes are kind of in the gutter, and so having some substantial and visible bike infrastructure there would help and be a good image for the city. Improve bike lanes on Pine Street. A lot of people use it as a commuting corridor. There's high speeds, parallel parking. The bike lane kind of comes in and out, and that's also where there's a ton of gunk in the lanes because it's just kind of the shoulder. Protected bike lanes on North Avenue. This is something that's pretty contentious right now. There's a corridor study going on North Avenue. I'm not sure what the most recent thing is. So right now, the city of Burlington is analyzing North Avenue and deciding how to move forward, because a lot of people are complaining that people who want more crosswalks, because right now there aren't really any, people who want bike lanes because it's a main corridor for commuting and there's no infrastructure for it, and there are people who want there to be like another lane of traffic for cars. A lot of people commute on that route, so it's really contentious, but the people who live there don't want to become a highway. So there's a study going on right now, and there's a lot of open panels for this. So definitely something you should check out if you're interested in this.
How do people get invited or like become aware of the panels that are happening?
This is an open process by the city of Burlington.
It's mostly done. They're moving to the next stage of actually, the city council has voted on 1 or 2 plans, and then they're moving on to the next phase of actually like getting the pricing and what it's going to take.
So this is underway, and that's one of the key corridors. And I know that groups like Bikeable Burlington Now has been really involved in that process, but I'm sure that they'd like input from more people. And then just general pavement upkeep everywhere. Bike lanes get shoved to the side. It's a high improvement, or it's a high recommended improvement by the survey respondents. Really correlated to safety, so people don't have to swerve into the lanes. And then I also proposed a bike box at Pearl Street and North Winooski Avenue. It was the intersection that people pass through the most, and it would mediate the danger of left-hand turns. And here's some recommendations for further research. More common bicycle rider counts could really help getting data moving forward. Getting a data set of these routes would be really helpful. So that you could do stuff, as I mentioned, and do the shortest route compared to what people are actually taking. And then also looking at sidewalk routing, because I realized people are choosing routes on this map, but I didn't know if they're going on the sidewalk or not, and that could be a huge difference depending. So people might ride on a road that they hate, say they're riding on it, but they're just going on the sidewalk. So without a method to determine that, that totally messes up with all your data collection. That's it. Thank you so much.